This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today we're doing episode 4. Today we're going to go over encounters. So encounters in Fantasy Grounds are relatively easy, but if you're starting your project from scratch or you don't already have content, it can take a while because they do have some dependencies. So we started the series off with doing artwork and NPCs. So the reason I did that is because when you're building up to encounters, you want to kind of have that stuff done first. Makes it a little bit easier to link the stuff together. So there's a couple ways that you can make NPCs. And I think one of the easier ways to do that is to have existing content, like for example, the SRD. If you're using a different rule set, this might be a little bit different, but the concept is still the same. So you'll make a copy of an existing NPC and edit the way you want. And I think that's the easier way to create NPCs. So I did a little bit of that ahead of time, and I wanted to show you that you can make a copy of an existing NPC fairly easily, provided that you have content loaded. So for example, in Fantasy Grounds, I already have the SRD bestiary loaded. I have the SRD data and some items. So this is essentially the content that comes from the OGL, the basics. If you're using a system like Pathfinder or one of the other rule sets, they might also have something similar. If you're using the archives of Nethys and those sorts of things, they have a lot of the core rules in there that you can copy and paste. But nonetheless, this is just kind of going over just the basics of NPCs because you kind of need those to build the encounters first. So we made tokens, we made some artwork, we're building NPCs. If you don't have the time to go through all that, you can essentially just use an existing NPC that already is made for an adventure or a bestiary, or maybe like you have a monster manual or something like that. So in this particular case, the bestiary comes with the Fantasy Grounds platform for D&D 5e. But if you're using a different rule set, it may not. You might have to actually get one of the bestiaries or one of the core books before you can have access to an NPC. But if you know what you're doing in Fantasy Grounds, you can build your own as well. So basically, what we're going to do is I'm building on the concept still of this border patrol. So this is a PDF that I got off the DM's Guild, where I've acquired different stats that kind of relate to 5e. And then I have the original PDF where it's talking about the Ketites, and this is their border patrol for the southern part of the map. And this is taking place in Greyhawk. However, the way it's set up for 5th edition is you just move the location to somewhere in the Forgotten Realms. So it kind of depends on where you want to place it, but they give you guidelines on that if you wanted to do so. The other thing is that the Border Patrol here, it just tells you a group of information here. It doesn't really give you the stat blocks or anything like that. And that's going to assume that you're going to use existing content from, from what you've already owned. So I'll do something like that. So basically, I have the bestiary loaded, and then I have my own group that I made before, which is where all the NPCs go. And at this point, I'm going to actually go down and click on uncategorized. So these are all the individual NPCs that haven't been put into a group yet. These are also the copies that I made. But I'm going to go ahead and drop down this group list, and I'm going to drag these individual entries into my own section here, which is the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, and that will place those guys in that group. So these are just copies of existing NPCs or ones that I've created, and now I've put those in this NPC section. So this is all of the different recommendations that the module gave me. And now I can go in and customize these if I wanted to. For instance, this priest could be this Mullah guy, and we put this Mullah together previously in another episode with making a custom NPC as opposed to using the copies. but I just wanted to have some content prepared and ready to go. So this is pretty much all of the different things that go into the caravan, or excuse me, the border patrol. And now we're going to actually make an encounter. So encounters are kind of tricky to do sometimes, depending on how you want to look at it. So quite often when you are setting up an encounter and you're doing a conversion, that type of work has already been done for you. You don't really have to worry too much about adjusting it, worrying about the party level, worrying about CR levels or challenge ratings. Those sort of things can really get complex, and they can take more time. So if you already kind of know what you're doing in regards to how many, what types of levels of the party and that sort of thing, it makes it a lot easier. There are tools online that you can refer to if you don't have a clue or you're not certain how that's supposed to go. So there is a website that I used to use all the time. I don't know if I would really need it anymore, but this is the Kobold Fight Club. And it's essentially a way to build encounters a little bit easier, so that you can set up an encounter based off the number of party numbers, what levels they are, and then how difficult the encounter is. And you would use these particular stat blocks over here, and then you can calculate like the difficulty, challenge rating, that sort of thing. So you can use something like this. This is not built into Fantasy Grounds, but I don't know if it's necessary. There used to be an extension out that used to do that for you. I don't know if it's been updated or brought up to speed, but there used to be a really cool extension that would help you do that to figure out the challenge ratings. But if you already have content that's in Fantasy Grounds and the monsters or the NPCs are set up correctly, it'll kind of give you that information as it is. So we're going to build the encounter, just the border patrol. So what I'm going to do is close this for now, and I'm going to leave the NPCs open. So this is relying on the fact that you've either made copies of the NPCs or you build your own. And generally speaking, when you make a copy, all you have to do is just drag the copy back into the list of where you pulled it from. So for instance, if I wanted to make a copy of this assassin, all I have to do is single left click, drag and drop right back into this list, and it makes another version. You'll notice there's not a little book over here. So this is a copy of the original. Then at this point, you can unlock it and you can edit it however you want. You can change the name, you can change the tokens, you can do however you want to do it. But this is just a thing to let you know that it is a lot simpler to do it like this. The only thing that might bother you or come up on you is how to word some of the, if you're going to change it drastically. If you want to add different traits and such, or different weapon attacks, you're going to have to modify those. But other than that, it's a fairly simple process. And then on this back sheet here, you can also add art, tables, whatever you want. But this is a standard practice in Fantasy Grounds. So quite often, if you try to unlock a book that belongs in a bestiary, it won't let you unlock it sometimes. It'll be basically, it'll be locked out, like from the official monster manual. These ones are OGL, kind of freebies, so you can edit these. The ones that come from official source books, those might be locked. So to get around that, from having that problem so you can unlock it, just would be making a copy of it, then renaming it, and then putting it in a different group. So that's essentially what I had done with most of these NPCs here in the previous episode. So going over to encounters, there's a couple ways you can do encounters, but whenever I do something in my adventure or the content I'm building, I'm going to build another header like I did here. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this menu down, click the edit button, click the green add category button, and then I'm going to actually take this title here and just copy and paste it from my NPCs and paste it over here. But then instead of saying NPCs, this is going to say encounters. So we're going to build our first encounter for this particular adventure. So now that I have my own group, I'm going to go ahead and stop editing, click on the group itself, and then down at the bottom, you can add an item or you can right click and add or create an item. So it's both do the same thing. So now that you have this, what I want to do is drag over the specific NPCs that are going to be a part of the encounter. So in this case, it says to use the bandits, to use the veteran, or the veteran, and then it says to use the priest. Now, the original encounter called for some horses. It had specific names for the NPCs. So this one has veterans, including it's basically a captain and a sergeant, a priest, bandits, which have crossbows instead of, or have short bows instead of crossbows, and a sergeant. So there really isn't any sergeant type NPC. So you can basically convert one of these into the sergeant if you want. Or in this case, I made my own. So I just drag this one over, and there we go. So this is just gives you an idea that all you have to do is drag these over to start the process. And now I'm going to put the Border Patrol as my title, because this is one of the patrols that's in the adventure. And you can title it how you want, but it's better if you try to title it after the name of the actual encounter in the content or the book. So this is Border Patrol here, and this is Border Patrol here. But what I could do here is put this information so I know which Border Patrol, because there's a couple different ones in here. And you could do that by you can basically add it to a description in your reference manual, or in this case, I'm just going to leave it as is. But once you have all these on here, now you can switch the quantity. So it's saying like 16 bandits, there's a priest, there's a sergeant, and there's this veteran. So these are just kind of giving an idea of what's here. So let's double check that with the PDF. So yeah, so we have a captain, the mullah, so that's basically your sergeant and such. And the mullah is the priest. And let's see, you got bandits, veterans, they're all humans, by the way. And then the sergeant has some +1 arrows, and the bandits have some +1 arrows. So that can be added to the sheet. So for instance, on the captain of the guard, I actually added, not the captain of the guard, but on the sergeant, I added a passage here about the +1 arrow. So I didn't really make a big deal out of it, but it's additional 1 damage with piercing because you have +1 arrow. Or you can make another longbow entry that has the +1 arrow as its damage. So you have 2 damage output potentials, 1 for regular arrows, 1 for the magic arrow. So you could do it that way too. And then on the back, I made my own extensive notes here so you can kind of get an idea of how these guys operate. So this is the nice part of making your own, is that you can kind of customize, you can add things, you can include things that don't normally get included in most NPC stat blocks. And this is an overview of the patrol, so I thought it'd be appropriate to at least put it on the sergeant. And then the rest of the guys, I just give them a basic description. Or I could put this on all of them. It just depends on how you want to do it. But essentially, you can come in here and change this stuff depending on what your needs are. I don't need the sergeant, but I just wanted to show you that. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it, but I'll leave it on there just for the sake of having some variation. So once you have your quantities, you can hit this refresh, and the CR challenge rating for this particular one in D&D 5e terms is a CR 8, and the XP is 2950. Now this is relying on the fact that each of these has their own XP and challenge rating on here. So that's why it's saying you got to build the NPCs first. And it's very handy to have the artwork already done too, because once you get to this point, if you don't have the artwork ready, it's kind of hard to go back and fix those retroactively. However, if you do have your artwork and you don't want to change the base of the artwork itself, you just want to change it for this particular encounter, you can go into your assets, and let's see, I want to go to tokens. And what I want to do is let's look at a sergeant. Let's see if we have a sergeant token instead of that letter S, because I want something better than that. Okay, so obviously these are a bunch of symbols, and then I do have a couple different images I could use here to be used as a sergeant. So in this case, these are more for like a modern game, but you can use this here. So this is from the Streets of Zobek, but you'd probably want to use just a regular token. So this is a sergeant. We can use this token if we want. This from Savage Worlds. And then this one is, oh, that's might work, excuse me. And then this one is a D&D Pog that I had imported myself. So you can take this and drag and drop it onto the main token here, and it will switch all the tokens out. So it's easier to change the artwork at this level than going back and having to do each one of them, and then you're updating the actual base of it instead of for the encounter. So if you want your counters to vary but just have the same stats and everything, you can go in and substitute the artwork out. So perhaps you have some archers and then you have some melee guys. So if you wanted to differentiate between the two, you could change the token artwork and have the same stat block and everything else, but at least visually on the map, you would be able to tell, oh, okay, these guys have bows and these guys have scimitars or whatever. So you could do that too, or change colors or however you want to do it, differentiate between archers and that sort of thing. So at this point, you can divide this up. Let's say instead of just bandits, maybe you want 8 of them to be mounted and they have bow and arrows or short bows, and then the other guys have scimitars. So instead of having 16 of these guys, you can break it up to 8 and 8. So you could do that. You could go 8 like this. Let's say 8 bandits, and then I'm going to do 8 more bandits. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I change that to 8 or 7. Let me fix that. And then what I'm going to do is rename it. So we're going to say archers. That way we can differentiate what they are in title, at least. And then these are melee. So you can do something like that to kind of help you determine what types of. Now that doesn't mean they both don't have a bow and they don't both have a scimitar. However, the starting point is that you can use something like that to differentiate them, at least out of the gate. Doesn't mean they can't switch weapons. And then over here on the right are these factions. So the factions will change when you drag them onto the combat tracker. So in this case, this just says faction. So they'll inherit whatever alignment, in this case, that they're going to have when you add them to the combat tracker. So they won't necessarily be friendly. They might be considered hostile, whatever. So if you don't want that as the default, or you don't want their default behavior, such as bandits, they are, I think they're neutral. But in this case, you may want to change that to where they have an alignment of some sort. Perhaps they are neutral, or maybe they're hostile, or maybe they're friendly. So you can change that now. So I'm going to change all these guys to neutral. So they're a border patrol, and when I read up on these guys from the adventure, it sounds like depending on how you operate and how you identify yourself with them in regards to alignment or your behavior, essentially, they'll change. But for the time being, I've made them neutrals. So when you add them to the combat tracker, they're considered a neutral unless you change something, make them mad, or maybe they become friendly. Then in the combat tracker, the GM can decide if they want to switch their faction. And that kind of helps when you have a large battle, so you know who's who, in a sense, by group. So this is the Border Patrol. Now, there are some more advanced functions that you can use in Fantasy Grounds to help you, I want to say not necessarily balance, but kind of shape the encounter based on the number of PCs that you have in the combat track, or not the combat tracker, but in the party sheet. So if I come over here to the party sheet, I don't have anything on here, but if I was going to add a player on here, I could have a change in how the behavior of this encounter works. So let me see if I can grab one adventurer. I should have at least one. Nope. So anyways, you could take the characters, put them on the party sheet, and then you go to this random tab, which would be kind of similar, except for you're going to set this up as a random encounter, which can randomize the numbers and the types of creatures, or in this case, patrol types that you run into. So instead of having a set amount of NPCs, this one will allow you to essentially customize it based off the number of party members. So that is kind of powerful when it comes to replay value. So if you wanted to run this adventure over and over again, that will help you with increasing the replay value of adventure. It kind of keeps from you having to go in and adjust it every time you run the adventure. So during one shots, or like maybe an intro game, like one of the basic games that come like Lost Mines or one of those, very useful for that, because if you run it more than once and you have a different mix of different amount of players, I should say, these can adjust for that, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to do this other type of encounter, which is similar, but we can scale it depending on the number of players. So this might not necessarily make any sense to do so if you have a neutral group like this, because they're not necessarily going to fight these guys. So making an encounter like this might be unnecessary. However, if you have a big mob of goblins or something, this might come in handy. So what we're going to do is kind of do the same thing. We're going to build the encounter, and this is going to be the border patrol again. But what it will do is it'll scale depending on how many players you have. So that's kind of a nice thing about Fantasy Grounds. It has some advanced functionality. So what we'll do is we're going to kind of emulate this. So what we'll do is we'll have this particular setup kind of similar. So actually, let me see if I can drag it from here. Yeah, so we'll have a veteran always. There'll always be at least one sergeant. There'll always be a magic user or a priest or something like that. But these bandits and archers things here might differ depending on how many players. And I'm not going to drag over both groups because I can adjust this, and we don't know what the mix that the GM wants. So with that in mind, what we'll do is we're going to take and adjust these. So for the veteran, always going to be 1, sergeant 1, the priest 1. But the bandits, we don't know. So we're always going to have at least 10. Okay, so that kind of makes it a static number, but it's not a true like 16, right? So we could just say the number of PCs plus 10 or something like that. We could do that. So what we'll do is we will use 10 as our modifier, but we'll say 10 plus then $PC. And what that does is it tells Fantasy Grounds to look at the party sheet. That's what this $PC does. It's an operator. And it will always give you at least 10 plus the number of PCs. And this also works with subtraction, addition, division, multiplication, whatever you want to throw at it, it should work. Now, it is predicating on the fact that you have players on the combat tracker. So if you don't, this really doesn't help a whole lot. So if I generate this now, it should give me 10 bandits. However, if I had more than 10 or more than 1 or 2 players, it would add that in. So that's why it'd be a good example. So let me actually grab a PC, and I'll show you what I'm saying here. So if I go to characters, and then I'm just going to hit this import button, and I'll import a player. So while that's doing its thing, it has to think. It has to go through my gazillion PCs. So that's why I always preach in a lot of my videos to keep your content minimal, because then you're going to get this hourglass thing. Okay, so we're just going to add one of my PCs. So we're just going to say soldier. Let's see if we have something like that. Okay, so here's our cleric soldier. We'll just add this guy here. And once you add this, once you import it, it becomes available for your pool of players. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this guy up, drag and drop him onto the combat tracker, and then I'm actually going to claim it. So if I right click, I'm going to take ownership of that. And then up here, if you want, you can turn on that tracker thing, and that will give you this overview. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to generate the encounter, and then I want to take any PCs that are on the actual party sheet. So I want to take that, and you can't put pets and animals and NPCs on there. It's only for your players. So for the party sheet, there's a shortcut up here. You can grab it, and you'll take any player characters, not NPCs. It doesn't work that way. And you can drag and drop those onto here. So this is when this calculation actually does something. So if I generate this, it should create 11 bandits because I only have one player here. It doesn't care or doesn't notice or recognize anything on the combat tracker, and you can only add players over here. So I'll go ahead and hit generate. So I got 11 bandits, and then everything else is 1, like it says here. So that's a really nice operator. So again, that's a $PC. So so the $PC is essentially what we typed in here. Now you can always do 10 plus 1 or 10 plus 5 or whatever you want to do there. But if you want it to calculate based off of the party sheet, you can do that. It doesn't know anything about your mix of your party level or what class you are or your special abilities, anything like that. It's strictly numbers. So it only knows quantity. It doesn't know, what the mix of the party is. So it won't scale in that regard, but for number of players, that's what that works for. And the nice part of that is to increase the replay value for your particular adventure. So if you don't want it to always generate or be a static encounter number every single time, you can make this type of encounter. You generate it. Once it's generated, then you can send that to your combat tracker, in this case, add to tracker. And it will populate all those guys in there. Pretty big encounter. I don't know if I'd actually run something this big in Fantasy Grounds. This is kind of pushing it. I think this would be kind of your ultimate encounter here. I would break this up, to be honest, in half. I don't know if I'd necessarily run that, but to get rid of these guys here, I'm going to go to menu, go to this garbage can, and then click delete all non-friendlies, and that'll get rid of those guys here. The other new thing you can do, since this is a kind of a random border patrol thing, you don't know exactly where this is going to occur. You can add this to the quick map now, which is a new feature that wasn't available. So I think this is where this sort of feature actually shines. So if you have tiles that are kind of already set up for Fantasy Grounds, more like fill tiles, things that are scaled that can easily tile and they won't look goofy, you want to go ahead and you can do a quick map. And then if you have the assets, or you already kind of know what you're dealing with here, you can click on the green plus button, go to your images. I was in tokens before, so you want to make sure you're in the correct art here. And I want to put in fill. So I want some fill assets that will work. So like these things that say fill, these will work better than just a static, like here's a base texture regional fill. So that might work better than a static tile because it doesn't know like what exactly what you're going to need it for or how you're going to use it. But I'm going to go ahead and click on this fill and use this in the quick map. And then this is going to be your border patrol, essentially. Now what you have to do is, are you going to use it as fill or use it as is? So I'll use it as fill, and I'll use it for small. I usually use small because a large map is usually unnecessary. I mean, it is going to be a pretty good sized battle, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. And then I'm going to disperse the group out here. So you can actually take and kind of group these things out. Let's say they come up on your players, and then your players are over here. So these are just your pre-placements. And then this is for the Border Patrol. Once you hit submit, it should technically, it adds them to the combat tracker, and then you automatically have this on a fill mode, and it's going on to this particular map. So this is not too bad. I like this because if you have like a hex map, for instance, if you're going to do a hex crawl, this would be perfect for that. So you have some predetermined terrain tiles, and then you would have those ready to go, like in a folder. And then when you do your hex crawl, whenever you come up to a random encounter like this, you could use this as a way to set that up for your party and not really worry about line of sight and that sort of thing, because you can just turn on the grid here and go for it. You don't necessarily have to have all that line of sight and stuff for this type of encounter. This is an outdoor encounter, and there isn't a whole lot of terrain here. Maybe there's a couple trees. You can wing that. But you can use this as a way to kind of run a hex crawl, which I think would be a really good idea if you didn't know what you were going to be doing in like an exploration mode. So I think that's where this works really well. For a planned encounter where you need line of sight and walls and all that, not so much. But for something like this, I think it worked really good. And then, of course, if you've got everything set, you can change the view mode. You go into this here, where you actually have your tokens on the map. So it looks pretty sharp like that. So the thing about it is that these tokens, I've done a couple videos beforehand that you got to go through and do these on your own in a lot of cases. But in this case, Doug's done all the SRD. So if you use the SRD monsters, they're all going to be pretty uniform. And like I said, this one's not optimized for this. It's using the old token, which is fine. And then this other one too. So you can make your own little standees, but I think this would work really well in a dungeon crawl or perhaps a hex crawler where you don't need all that tactical stuff set up ahead of time. So this is how you would do a NPC encounter, and then you have two different ways you can do it. So you can do it through the regular encounters, which would be like a static number, and then you could do a random encounter, which is what I was showing you earlier, where you can kind of stack the numbers, or stack the deck in a certain manner depending on what your needs are. So that's just kind of a way to do encounters. So that's the majority of what I wanted to show for this. So basically, you want to have your NPCs built first, then you want to have all your artwork, and then you build your encounters. If you do it the other way, it can be a kind of a mess, and you're going back and forth between making art and making NPCs, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not as efficient or organized. So my suggestion would be to get all of the encounters done, all of the artwork done, all of the NPCs done, and then link them together at the end. This is the fun part. The work is actually making all these tokens and building all the NPCs, and then building all the encounters. So this is the end product that I'm showing you now, is kind of the fun part. But I just wanted you to be aware of that process. You can make copies of encounters and rename them and then switch them around. You don't have to use the exact planned encounters from an adventure. You can make a copy of it. So let's say there's an encounter and maybe you want to use it in a different area. So you can just take one of your existing encounters, drag and drop it just like you did with the NPCs, crack it open, unlock it, rename it, change the quantities around, maybe change the token, the art, and call it good. And that's how flexible Fantasy Grounds can be. And that doesn't take as long as building everything from scratch, as I was showing you in previous videos. So this is kind of a quick way to get an encounter ready and not have to spend all day on it and just make a few modifications. So it depends on what's going on in your game and what your needs are, but there is a real simple way to do it, or you can do it from scratch, like I'm trying to show you also that part of it. So this more has to do with running the game and how you actually use Fantasy Grounds, whereas before I was trying to show you how to build the content. But at least you have a combination of both. So we had the NPCs, we worked on the art, and now we're doing the encounters. They all kind of go hand in hand. So you have your tokens, you had your, your 3D asset art, and then you have all this stuff now where you're building encounters, and you can decide if you want to make it a random encounter or a preset encounter. You can also have tables roll encounters for you. So in this particular patrol, I think our next episode, maybe I will do tables since it's kind of standalone, but it will tie into this, is that I need some loot generated, and then I need some, maybe I want the quantities and all the different types of encounters. Maybe I want that to be random. So here's a random encounter table. So I might turn this into a 1d20 table as suggested here, and then use this as my starting point, and then hopefully I'll have all these NPCs ready, and then we'll do that and make a random table there. And then the actual border patrol itself, they have loot, so I might want to make a loot table for this particular group. So if you come into the original adventure and you come down through here, it says that the encounters have 2 to 5 gold each, which you could just make a static encounter loot where it just gives you like 3 golds instead, like average it. It says others will have 10 gold per level, and then each leader will have an additional 120 plus 3d10. So that really depends on how you want to do this. But then there's also the question of the +1 arrows. So you might set that up on another table, which will give you a 30% chance or maybe a 40% chance of finding these +1 arrows, and then whatever stuff they have on them if you want to go that deep into looting. So this is basically gold and potentially having some content on them if you were to fight them, defeat them, and loot their bodies. So you can kind of get that deep into it if you want to. And being that this is a Greyhawk kind of old school adventure, I would go that deep. In a 5th edition game, maybe depends. Maybe I just worry about the gold, maybe the arrows, but I don't know if I'd get into looting their armor and all that other stuff. Just depends on your players too. But that's kind of a decision you have to make, because you're going to add more work, more things that can potentially break. So if you want to keep it simple, I would just make a loot table that just has some coins. Or if you want to make it more complex, the crafting stuff, the armor, all the gear, all that stuff. So it kind of depends. So we'll do that on the next Friday. We'll do a loot table, and we'll do a random encounter table. I think those will be pretty simple to do. You just have to have everything kind of set up. So being that I already done the NPCs, I haven't done the items, but I'm pretty sure +1 arrow and gold are pretty standard. But if I wanted to do all of their gear, that may add more work to my plate. I might have to create something unique for this particular group. If you're doing that for every single encounter, that's a lot of work. So just kind of let you know. But this is just a kind of a way that you can tie this back to the adventure, but then also add some depth to your adventure too. So if you don't want it to be so generic, or you don't want to do the work after the fact and you want a lot of that done up front, you can do that. And that's the nice thing about Fantasy Grounds, is it is built around the game master, and you can do a lot of this stuff up front and save yourself a lot of work on the back end. Or if you want, you can do it on the back end and just kind of let things happen and hope for the best. But either way, you get the opportunity to change how you want it to be, especially if it's homebrew or something like that. And then one other thing I wanted to tell you was that I used ChatGPT to help me with this particular content. So all I did with ChatGPT is I kind of organized the information. I didn't really generate too much with it, but I just took this information here with the patrol, and then I used this to help formulate the kind of like the summary of the patrol. And then I had it make me a couple stat blocks like I did. There wasn't a generic one for the sergeant. And then I kind of used it just to kind of organize the information. That's all I used it for in this case. So there's some times where I'll use it to make art. There's other times where I'll just use it to organize game information. So that's where that comes in handy. And then, like I said, if you want to balance the encounters and you're worried about the CR levels and all that stuff, you can use a tool like this Kobold Fight Club. I think I'll put that in the description after the video, just in case. And you can use this to help balance your thing. So if you have, let's say, 3 players at this game is like level 6 through 10. So we'll have level 6 at 3 players. And then what we'll do is we're going to add, let's see, 1 at 7th level. And then we have another guy at 9th level. So this would be your party here. And then what you do is you would either type in or search for content, and it would build this encounter, and then you can decide, you know, if you want it, if it's medium, if it's random, whatever. So in this case, I can change that. Which is kind of neat is you can manage the sources, like where it's pulling from. So if you just want the SRD and you want the just the basic rules in the SRD, you can do that. And that'll narrow down the list here. And then you can decide how powerful you want it, that sort of thing, and then use this tool to calculate all that stuff for you. So if you're really worried about that, you can use a tool like this. So hopefully that's helpful. Like I said, this is just a tool you can use. Fantasy Grounds is really just another tool as well. Don't let Fantasy Grounds run you around. You got to run the application if you can help it. So that takes practice. It takes time. It takes work. It's not always easy. So it is going to take you a bit to figure all this stuff out. But hopefully that'll help you guys out. And just remember that, you know, we're in this together. I'm not a know-it-all. I don't know everything. I just know what not to do. And I'm just trying to help you guys out. I'm not a professional game designer, nor do I work for Smiteworks. This is just a fan-driven video to help you guys tackle some of the basic fundamentals within Fantasy Grounds, and also convert a cool classic module from 1st edition to 5th edition, and then adding your own touches to it. So you guys have a good weekend. Enjoy. If you guys are around this weekend, tune in to the GaryCon. I know a few of our community members are there. I know Brad's there, Paulette's there. If you guys know Garner, he's also part of the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today, starting in, I think, an hour, they're going to have a silent auction for a bunch of really cool collectible stuff. And that's going on for 24 hours till Saturday night at 8 p.m. So I think it's 8 p.m. So I got a social media thing out for that with the link for it. But they're going to be auctioning off a whole bunch of weird, old, classic kind of private collection stuff. So if you're a big collector, you might want to get on that. But anyhow, you guys, take care.